Howdy, this is Lemmy with RevZilla, here to talk to you today about how to buy a used motorcycle. Look, there's a million different ways to foul up when you're buying a used motorcycle. Hopefully at the end of this video though, you feel confident that you're not buying a total bucket of bolts that's going to leave you stranded on the side of the road. Now we've structured this video specifically for those of you purchasing a motorcycle private party. So regardless of whether you found your used bike on Craigslist or on eBay or maybe even in the classified section of your local paper, this video is for you. Now that's not the only way, of course, to obtain a used motorcycle. You can always wander down to your local motorcycle shop and buy a pre-loved bike from those folks. That process is a little bit different though. Those bikes are almost certain to be roadworthy, and you're probably going to be paying a little bit more for that privilege. Now, that whole process really looks a lot like buying a new motorcycle, so I would direct you to Spurgey's video here. He teaches you how to buy a new motorcycle. Now, that video is just one in a mini-series we have helping new riders navigate the process of obtaining their first motorcycle. So be sure you subscribe to us so you can catch all of the videos in that series. Let's get back to the used bike thing though. You've got some work to do before you ever even leave the house. Evaluate the seller and evaluate the buyer. Now when I talk about evaluating the seller, I mean examine the ad of the motorcycle you're interested in fairly carefully. We want to see at a minimum clear pictures, cogent text about the bike, a good contact number or email address for the seller, and you also want to see a bike that's within your economic range. Regardless of what a bike is actually worth, you don't want to spend your time arguing price with an unrealistic seller. It winds up just being a total waste of time for each of you. Now I also mentioned evaluating the buyer, and that means kind of looking inside yourself and what you expect and what you're going to give up and what you're going to get in return. Remember, motorcycles take time, they take money, and they also take effort. So perhaps you're one of those folks who has more time than money. You can sit there and wait for the perfect cherry motorcycle to come along that you can scoop up for a great price. Then again, if you tend to have a couple extra bucks burning a hole in your wallet, you may want to actually kick them in, employ them, so you get exactly the bike you want that's in great shape. All you lose is a few dollars in the bargain. Now, of course, effort comes into play as well. You can pick up a bike if you're willing to put some sweat equity into it, especially if it's something that needs a little bit of TLC mechanically. You can throw a little bit of labor at it and have yourself a motorcycle that's really worth riding around on. Then again, if you're all thumbs when it comes to mechanicals, you might want to avoid that plan. Now it's time to get in contact with the seller. In addition to the when and where you're going to be meeting the seller, you also need to cover some finer points as well. And the first one you want to go over is a professional inspection. Anybody buying a used motorcycle should have a pro check out their bike, regardless of whether or not it's mandatory in your state or region. The reason for this is a professional mechanic is likely to find some safety issues that you may miss during your own cursory inspection of the motorcycle. The next thing you want to go through with the seller too is requesting that they leave the bike cold. The reason is that a bike that starts easily and runs well when it's cold is likely in a very good state of tune. Hearing that bike fire up easily when it's cold should be excellent reassurance that the bike's probably in very good shape. If you ask a seller to leave a bike cold and you get there and you touch the motor and the bike has been warmed up, you might want to proceed with caution. That could indicate a seller that's trying to hide something from you. The final thing, and arguably the most important, is to make sure the bike has a title. You don't want to buy a stolen bike. That's a big problem for everybody, but most especially you. Now we found a great specimen. Let's go take a ride and check this bike out. Yep, I drove my truck because we might be buying a new motorcycle, and you can't load a new motorcycle into the bed of another motorcycle. Now if you look around, we're here in suburbia because most used bike inspections are going to take place somewhere like a driveway. Now I'm not buying a motorcycle, I have plenty of motorcycles. However, my colleague Chris has been looking for his first bike, and he's been getting lots and lots of advice from Spurge and I. Chris, it's time to get in the game.
Hey, Pat.
Hey, Chris.
How's it going?
Pretty good.
Bike looks really good.
Yeah, it'll be a shame to see her go.
Is that the title? You mind if I take a look?
Absolutely. Should be up to snuff.
Whoa, 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 whoa. This is actually a really important part of the process. Note that Chris isn't just verifying the title exists, but instead he's actually going to check to make sure that the numbers on the title exactly match the numbers on the headstock of the motorcycle. I don't really care if the seller is the Pope. The Pope better have clean paper. When you consider how easy it is to come by beginner motorcycles, it doesn't make sense to saddle yourself with somebody else's titling error. Let's return to this high-stakes drama.
Looks like everything checks out. Let me take in this bike.
Yeah, knock yourself out.
Can you fire it up for me?
Absolutely. You might want to cover your ears. She's a loud one.
Hey, get out of here, get out of here, get out of here. Turn this noisemaker off. I got a little surprise for all you out there in video land. We mechanical types, we're great with wrenches, but not so much with crystal balls. We can't really take apart the entire motorcycle to determine how the internals are, so a lot of times we're using external clues to figure out how the bike may have been taken care of. Generally speaking, fluid should be inside the motorcycle. If you see any type of drips or pooling fluid, that's usually not a very good thing. You may also see seeps too. Seeps aren't as aggressive as leaks, but you'll typically see them manifested by oil or grease kind of mixed in with road dirt. It turns into a brownish goop. That's no good. Now, when you're underneath the motorcycle checking things out, you also want to pay attention for the exact opposite, a motorcycle that's too clean underneath. That may be indicative of a seller who's trying to cover something up. Now, while we're on the topic of fluids, make sure you check out quantity and quality as well. Low engine oil? That's a really big problem. Dark brake fluid? That may indicate an owner who is stingy on the service dollars. Proceed with caution. Now, the next big item you want to cover is crash damage. There can be telltale signs all over a bike that it's been down before. There's all sorts of things you can look for. I'm talking about things like curled brake levers, bent shift levers, different color parts. You want to examine the motorcycle for rash on places that you wouldn't expect to see it, mirrors or perhaps side plastics. And that shouldn't necessarily preclude you from buying the motorcycle, but still you should know that if you're uncomfortable assessing crash damage, buying a bike that's been heavily crashed can be a really expensive proposition. Now, having said this, you also want to talk to the owner about the crash. If they're forthright about the fact the bike has been down and they're honest about the repairs they made or didn't make, that's usually not too big a deal. However, if they try to cover up the fact the bike has been down before, they may be being untruthful about other items on the motorcycle. Once you've got the big stuff vetted out on the bike, it's time to check out some of the smaller detail items. Stick your nose into the gas tank, see if it's all rusty in there. Similarly, you can look at the paint on the motorcycle. If you see deep, glossy paint that's been well waxed, that's usually a good sign. You can also check out the seat cover as well. If that's in good shape, odds are excellent the owner did their best to keep the bike protected from the elements. Another item you might want to check out as well is the tires. Tires can give you a lot of information about the bike. If you see a matched set on there, odds are pretty good that the seller didn't mind spending bucks on the motorcycle. Similarly, also examine the tread life and condition on there. It turns out the tires cost a couple of bucks. If you're buying your first bike and you have to immediately slam a set of skins on it, you may be spending more than you initially planned on. Generally speaking, if you're paying careful attention to the outside of the bike, you'll get a good idea for what's going on the inside.
Well, the bike sounds and looks great. When was the last time you had it serviced?
Quite recently. I actually keep all the receipts in this folder, and there's a shop manual to whoever buys the bike.
Oh, excellent. Why are you selling the bike?
I recently bought a new one.
Congratulations. When was the last time you took this one out?
I actually rode it into work last week.
Hey, sorry about that. So it might seem like Chris is just being chatty Cathy right now, really pestering Pat about his bike. But what he's actually doing is politely interrogating him. He's trying to find out a little bit more about the bike by keeping Pat talking about it. You should be doing the same thing. Ask the seller why they're getting rid of the bike or why they bought it in the first place, and maybe talk to them too about some of the trips they took, long or particularly memorable rides. Anything to get them going about the motorcycle so you can tease a little bit of information out about the motorcycle. You can also use nonverbal clues too. Does the place look like a motorcycle junkyard? That's probably not a good thing. If you remember, Pat mentioned that he had picked up a new motorcycle. It would seem reasonable then that he'd probably be selling a learner bike thereafter. Now, this is also a great time when you should probably be asking about service records, service manuals, or, my favorite, OEM or aftermarket parts. Remember, Pat's not going to need them anymore, and he's probably willing to let them go for a song. Now, in a bit of terrible foreshadowing, I bet we have a test ride coming.
Hey, I really like this bike. You mind if I take it for a spin?
I don't know. What if you drop it, or what if you run off? I'd rather you didn't.
Fair point. I've got $2,500. If I wreck it, consider the bike bought.
Seems fair. Do you have a helmet?
Sure do.
All right, while Chris is pulling that lid onto his melon, let's talk test ride for just a second. Now, if you have a license and you're comfortable jumping onto somebody else's motorcycle, there's absolutely no reason you can't do the test ride yourself. However, if you're uncomfortable, mechanically inept, or perhaps unlicensed, you may want to strongly consider bringing along a more experienced motorcyclist with you to stand in your place for the test ride. Now, one of the other things to talk about too is the fact that, as you just saw, some sellers are a little bit reticent to let their pride and joy go rolling down the road with a complete stranger on top. So one good way to encourage a seller to give you a test ride is to negotiate the price of the motorcycle and then put the cash into their hand. Then you can take your test ride, and it can be contingent upon that test ride as to whether or not you're going to buy the motorcycle. Of course, tradition dictates that if you put the bike down, you're buying the bike whether you like it or not. At this point, it's time for a safety check. Now, this isn't going to be the same type of check you've been doing to make sure the bike is in mechanically good shape. What you're doing instead now is making sure the bike's actually safe to ride. So some of these things you may have actually covered. Now, in your MSF class, you may have heard something like the acronym T-clocks. This stands for tires, controls, lighting, oil, chassis, and stands. These are the basic things that you want to check before you get onto a strange bike. You should make a habit of doing this too, because this isn't just when you're buying a bike, this is really when you jump on any unfamiliar motorcycle. And I probably shouldn't have to say it, but I will anyway, you want to pay as little as you can for your motorcycle. You're likely to want to upgrade your bike or perhaps replace something after you drop it once or twice, and having a couple bucks in the bank can make that an easy process.
I love it. Let's do some paperwork.
Great, pleasure doing business with you.
I'm gonna grab some tie downs.
And once the deal is done, you want to cross some T's and dot some I's, and that begins with making sure you get the paperwork knocked out. In just about all cases, the seller is going to need to sign the title over. And in many places, you're going to need a bill of sale as well. Now, there are some states that require some other stuff too, like a notary signature perhaps. You want to familiarize yourself with your state's requirements before you ever head out to check out a used motorcycle. Now, the final piece of the puzzle here is going to be getting this motorcycle home. Now, in a lot of places, it's not legal to just jump on a bike you just purchased, and even if it is legal, you might not want to do it, especially if you're unlicensed. You may want to enlist the help of a friend who happens to have a truck. Alternatively, too, you can also see if the seller is willing to work with you and house the motorcycle for a while until both you and the bike are legal. Don't forget to, again, to leave some money in reserve for what I would call unforeseen expenses. A lot of people forget that motorcycles typically have sales tax when they're transferred, even when they're used. And again, you may wind up needing parts or fluid changes, and don't forget about that all-important professional mechanics inspection. Just in case it wasn't obvious from the absolutely awful acting, that transaction was staged. Be assured, though, that the real deal will look very, very similar. Now, if you're wanting a little bit more education, head on over to Common Tread. We've got a couple articles that should be pretty helpful, including some tips on haggling, as well as an article on how to make sure the bike you're buying isn't stolen. Now, don't forget too, this video is just one in a mini-series talking about how to buy your first motorcycle. So check out those other videos and subscribe to us at RevZilla.com so you can catch all our content as we're rolling it out. I'm Lemmy, and I'm out of here.